Good evening and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French. What an afternoon. The jury in the Derek Chauvin trial, they have reached a verdict.
State of Minnesota plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin defendant. Verdict, count 1. Unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony. Find the defendant guilty. Third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act. Find the defendant guilty. Second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk. Find the defendant guilty.
The former Minneapolis police officer guilty on all 3 charges, and it took the jury less than 10 hours to reach those verdicts. Immediately after the judge read the charges, Chauvin handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom, bringing directly to jail where he will await his sentencing, which should come in roughly 8 weeks. He faces up to 40 years in prison, but could well get less as he has no prior convictions. Now, people outside the courtroom, they started cheering right away after hearing the verdict. Now hundreds of them peacefully gathering on the streets of Minneapolis, many of them hugging and crying. Minutes ago, the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, spoke.
Although a verdict alone cannot end their pain, I hope it's another step on the long path toward healing for them. There's no replacing your beloved Perry, or Floyd, as his friends called him, but he is the one who sparked a worldwide movement, and that's important.
And we also heard from the prosecutors who were in the courtroom.
I'm honored to have stood with the Floyd family, to stood with the state of Minnesota as we go through this painful process together. And it's been my privilege to practice with this incredible, gifted trial team. And so I stand here today in gratitude. I'm thankful. I want to thank the jury for their service, for doing what was right and decent and correct and speaking the truth and finding the right verdict in this case.
And they did so in a single definitive voice. Prosecutor Jerry Blackwell also spoke. He delivered the rebuttal to the defense's closing argument that proved to be very memorable.
No verdict can bring George Perry Floyd back to us. But this verdict does give a message to his family that he was somebody, that his life mattered, that all of our lives matter.
And I should note that we are waiting for President Biden to speak, and we're expected to be hearing from the prosecutors also this hour. I want to bring in my first guest to discuss Tom Heffelfinger. He's an attorney in private practice in Minnesota. He's also former assistant Hennepin County attorney, also former federal prosecutor. First of all, Tom, I think the president said it well, where this could have been a tinderbox here tonight, and you could feel the tension when the judge read those verdicts. I know, usually there's a tell. There was no readbacks. There was no questions asked, and it came in a relatively short period of time, and you knew there wasn't a hung jury. Still, though, did you feel that apprehension before the jury read the verdict?
Absolutely. The entire state of Minnesota has been on alert for this verdict. Just concerned that the right thing be done. And the verdict here represents the evidence. And I am confident that Minnesota will be able to move on positively from this tragedy.
What felt different about this case beyond the obvious, Tom, that the world saw, the 9.5 minutes in video, and it really put them there at the scene? But beyond the video, how the case was laid out, what surrounded this, and, without saying, a single case, is a turning point in terms of policing or justice. Talk about the significance and from somebody who was in the shoes of the prosecutors, how they both acquitted themselves and how this case felt different.
Well, as a former U.S. attorney, I've handled a number of cases that are high visibility. This is one of them. But what makes this special out of this tragedy was that Mr. Chauvin's conduct was judged by all of his fellow citizens, not just the people that are on the street, not just the people that were in the jury box, but also his peers in the police department. This was everybody, every witness, every citizen here has expressed their opinion that Mr. Chauvin violated the law, and he violated the policies and practices of a good police officer.
And to amplify that, Tom, the police chief fired him. He testified as saying that what he did was not police procedures. One of the longest serving members of the Minneapolis PD said no. What he saw on video was not good policing and it wasn't worthy of the badge. Just how uncommon is that? We all talk about the blue line, but police publicly said, no, this is too far.
Police have historically, in Minnesota and elsewhere, stood up for each other. And you call it the blue line, call it what you will. But in this case, that didn't happen. And the witnesses who testified against him, not only did it include the police chief, his ultimate boss, but it also included his immediate supervisor. And those people, the people who knew him best from up close, and the people who knew him from 30,000 feet within his department, all said, that was wrong. That's not how we do policing in Minnesota.
When you look at this, is this a one-off? And the president has said that he wants criminal justice reform or police reform more specifically to be happening at the state and the local levels. You've walked 1,000 miles in these shoes here. What's your sense as to come out of this to make people feel more comfortable that there's not two types of justice depending on the color of the skin of the defendant?
This verdict really was an officer being held accountable for his illegal conduct. I hope that is not a one-off. I am concerned. This case was factually different from most other police violence in which firearms are the weapon that was used. And so officers are being held accountable for split-second decisions that they have made. This case did not involve a split-second decision. It involved 9 minutes, roughly, of watching Mr. Chauvin do something illegal. I hope that the lesson of police accountability to be learned by members of the departments, it is not a one-off, and that it will guide police conduct moving forward.
And finally, as a prosecutor, both federal and also somebody, called Hennepin County home, you have to be impressed by the case that was laid out by the prosecution. And, the defense had a hard case to defend, but that doesn't take away from the witness after witness, the expert testimony, and how methodical, I thought, and compelling a case that was laid out, that it was, I would think, impossible as a juror to look at what was presented and come to any other verdict other than this. And maybe a lot of people said it would be tough to convict on all three charges, but you knew there were going to be some guilty verdicts after the case that was laid out.
This prosecution team deserves a lot of credit for good work. The final argument, for example, from my friend Steve Schlischer, laid out the elements of these very difficult charges, but laid them out specifically in order to make it easier for the jury to render a decision based on the totality of the evidence. And I think, if anything, the speed with which, and this was relatively fast, the speed with which the jury returned a verdict reflected the quality of the evidence, the quantity of the evidence, but also the outstanding manner in which the prosecution presented the evidence and then argued it during the summation. And Eric Nelson did a great job for his client. His job was to ensure that the man got a fair trial, and he did. So it was really, as a lesson for people watching trials, this was a great trial to watch because you saw lawyering at its best.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate throughout this trial you making time for us, and certainly from the perspective of a man who knew this courthouse very well and a lot of the principals involved in it. Tom Heffelfinger, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
We, of course, are going to spend the entirety of this hour talking about the impact of this verdict. Andrew will be joining me shortly, and also we'll have a good friend, civil rights attorney, who's going to talk about the impact of this beyond just this one case here. You're looking at a live picture of Minneapolis. We're also going to be hearing from President Biden, who will be speaking this hour, we expect, about the verdict. If you're joining us late here, guilty on all 3 counts, murder in the second, murder in the third, and a manslaughter case as well. A collective sigh from most of America tonight here, exhale, in terms of what might have been a very violent evening in American history. But still, many questions to be asked. Where do we go from here? All that we'll get into when we come back from this commercial break. Please stay with us.